Good morning. Good morning. We are going to talk for just a few minutes about the part of transition where he rolls away our shame. And this is just a place where this verse in Joshua has really popped for me all week long. The Lord has been talking to me about transition, really just a very focused part of transition, and what does it look like, and what does it look like when he's taking us through transition from one part of our story to the next. And so as we've walked this through, if we're following the story of the Israelites crossing from the wilderness, crossing over the Jordan, and about to take on the promised land, which is at this point, it's Canaan, it's Jericho is the first part of that. So as we think about what that looks like and mirror it to the New Testament realities that Jesus brought and revealed, what does it mean? What's it look like? And in Joshua 5:9, it says, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you.'" And in the ESV, it says, "Today I have rolled away the shame of your slavery in Egypt." So that place has been called Gilgal to this day. And so context again in Joshua 5 is Moses has died. Joshua is the leader. Joshua is an Old Testament picture of Jesus. And Joshua led us through the Jordan by sending the priests ahead with the ark, which represents the presence of God, the covenant of God, everything he's revealed to the children of Israel in the desert. And then that leads through. Now they're on the other side of the Jordan, and this is the place where they know God has given them this land. The people inside Jericho are shaking in their boots. He knows, they know with all certainty, this is it. This is their time. This is what God has promised. God had promised them before they left Egypt. God had actually promised it all the way back to Abraham. And so here is this moment where they're getting ready to go. But here's the thing. There's something that had to be renewed. There had to be restored before they could step into that place where they take the promise. And this is the place where the shame is removed in an act that reminds them of covenant. So in that time, as he walked over, the Lord said, "Now I want you to circumcise all of these men." Because the generation that was born in the wilderness was not circumcised. And circumcision was that cutting away of the flesh in the most private part that revealed the reproduction of generations. Wow. So in that space where what you produce is going to provide those generational inheritance, that generational reality, in that space, we're going to cut it away, cut the flesh away to remind you that this is a covenant. And so the cutting away of the flesh was to remind them of the covenant that he had made with Abraham when he said, you are going to be father of many nations, and through you all nations will be blessed. And he spoke that to a man who did not have children, who did not have any reality. So if you remember, like, my key pivotal verse for the entire year is Hebrews 4:18 and 19, that it says, "Against all hope, Abraham believed." So here is the place where God is saying, I'm making a covenant with you, and it's about what I'm going to do and who you are, because I'm going to reveal myself to you, and then I'm going to reveal who you are to me, so that your identity is based on your relationship to me and the revelation of who I am. So here's a moment of transition where we've already walked through the miraculous parting of the Jordan. We're now walking into this place, and before that happens, we need an entire generation to remember that God is the God of covenant. Remember that where I'm taking you is because of my covenant with you, and my covenant reveals who I am and who you are of me. Because he said, I'm going to create and establish a nation. And so for us, we are sons and daughters of God. And so as we go through, we're remembering, like, no matter what, I know who I am because I know who you are. And that is a continually remembering. And I almost brought communion in this week, but I didn't, and because we always run out of time. And because in that is a remembering of, God, this is reminding me of the covenant that you made, because you cut the flesh, you circumcised the heart. Colossians 2 says that there is a circumcision not made by hands. And there's in Romans 5 it says there's a circumcision of the heart. And so there's a tearing away and a cutting away of the flesh from the heart. And we just talked about some of those things right before we came on video. But it is to say, we go through things and it's always a matter of the heart. And there's times when God is so gracious and so kind that he's going to cut things away from the heart so that it can be this is the one, this is what I'm shaping and forming. This isn't like, okay, one and done. This is, I'm continuing to shape and form. And so we go through, and he says, when we look at Joshua 5:9, I'm going to give you the Hebrew. And gala is rolled away. It means to remove by rolling and turn away and to take off. And so that's what Jesus did. We come into agreement with what he did by the position of the heart, by the surrendering of the will. And that's in those moments. In the moments. And I find myself in lots of moments where there's just a surrendering of the will. And it's something is crushing, something is suffocating, something is just kind of like, dear God, this is killing me. And it's like, what is it that you want to take away? What is it that you're rolling away? What is it that you're cutting away, Lord? And if you think about it, the cutting away is conviction of the heart. It is convincing of Jesus and saying, but this isn't. And so when we're convinced of who he is, he also is convinced of like what is in us that isn't of him, that he's rolling away and moving away. He has the power by his grace to move it away. It's just ours is the surrender of it to leave it on the table. Mm-hmm. Ours is that surrendered place to say, I'm going to leave it there. And I say this and know like it's easier said than done. There's moments. There's just moments. And it doesn't matter what we're talking about, whether we're talking about relationships, marriages, kids, grandkids, whether it's talking about health issues that people find that it doesn't matter. Like, what is that thing that we're fighting against? What is some area of unbelief? What's some area of the struggle, of the challenge where we go, but Lord, like I really just don't matter. Like, what is that belief system that you've picked up along the way? Maybe because of the way things have been for so long. The children of Israel had been in slavery for 400 years. Ivan actually spoke to that at the end on Friday night. But the children had been in there for 400 years. And what happens is, for a period of time, this shapes the identity. It shapes mindsets. It shapes belief systems. You forget who you belong to. You get so comfortable in the bondage. You get so comfortable. It's not comfortable. But if you just give up hope and stay in despair and say, this is just the way things are always going to be, that belief system will shape. You will become an orphan in your mindset to say like, okay, well, like I've just been left alone and nobody cares. There's a whole mindset that builds and develops around that slavery, that bondage. Nobody sees, nobody cares. There's a whole mindset that it gets developed. And I'll say, like, the older people get, the more I see that there's a generation that ages, and we will all be there, is that you get neglected and discounted. But you cannot buy into that. Just because culturally that's how people are does not mean you get to buy into that. And so the rolled away there. And then there's the reproach. So reproach is more than embarrassment. It means the disgrace that you feel, the shame, the humiliation, the scorn, the public dishonor, or the stigma that you might feel like you carry. It might be stigma of life situation. It might be stigma of some way to say, well, I never planned for this to be my identity. I never planned for this to be my reality. And so like, that's that. Like, how does he roll that away? There's plenty of people in 400 years that were born into that slavery. They didn't choose it, but they began to believe like an orphan mindset. They've just been left. This is their destiny. They're not. And so that mindset took them all the way through the wilderness in a place of unbelief where they would not cross over. Because that mindset of slavery was never going to be the mindset that could possess the promise that God had given them. And so here it is to say, in the Old Testament, there was an identity of shame, and it was things like Sarah's barrenness, or Israel's, disgrace, or where they're mocked by their enemies. If you remember all the different places where David felt like mocked by his enemies, every time there was something happened. And we've talked about lots of situations here. We've talked about Joseph just a few minutes ago off camera. There's so many different situations. If you remember Elizabeth, New Testament, Luke 1, remember? Like, she carried the shame of barrenness until that angel met her. Right, we've talked about that story. We won't review it. But then you have an angel who encountered Mary, and it is, Lord, be it unto me as you have said. That is where the promise comes from. Lord, be it unto me as you have said. That is hope. That is saying, I believe. Even though I've never had natural relations with a man, even though it's completely impossible, that it's just to say, he rolls away any of the shame, rolled away the reproach of Egypt. So they were slaves. The reality of their physical situation. Okay? We're not saying, oh, your reality isn't real. They were slaves. They were treated as inferior. They were oppressed. They were owned. They did not have their own ownership. They could not just go and as they wanted. And then they were powerless. They actually didn't have power in the natural. So that was their physical reality. That was their life reality. And that reality shaped a mindset that couldn't cross the Jordan, that couldn't take on. That's the mindset that said, there's giants in the land and we're just grasshoppers. We're always inferior. This is how we see ourselves instead of this is how we see God. So in this is a space where he's renewing a covenant, reminding them of who they are, and then it takes that time to heal before they could get up and then get the strategy for how they're going to take down Jericho. Because they are. God is just pausing. But here's this moment where they're going to renew a covenant and say, when we cut this, we are going to. So when I take the cup, I'm remembering I am a covenant daughter. I am a covenant, and I know who I am, and I know who he is. And I'm remembering again every single time I take communion, or every single morning I'm in communion with Jesus. I am remembering. And so that they take the space of remembering and cutting away the flesh. And I say, oh God, like I can't actually cut flesh, but I can surrender it and then you do it. Yes. Because there is a circumcision of the heart that is not made with hands. Yes. It is a surrendered will. I surrender to hope every day. I surrender to believing that this isn't where I'm staying. Every day, I choose to not surrender to unbelief, to not surrender my hope. I'm not surrendering to the faith I have that says, I know that what he has given me. I know there's a hope in a future. Every day in the critical place of transition where the heat is on, every day I'm choosing it. And every day when there is something that comes up, I'm like, dear Jesus. And some days it just takes a lot longer than others. Like, because some days there's things that shake you to the core for me. And so, and then it's like, but identity reminds you who you are and whose you are. And it's back to the place of identity and belonging. Identity and belonging. And that will secure you. And so Genesis 17, 1-2 reminds you of what that promise was to Abraham. And then, and it is about the inheritance. Now, the inheritance is what we have in Jesus through the Holy Spirit, because he is our inheritance. But he's also giving you, through your generations, an inheritance. And an inheritance of establishing families who grow up in the peace and the love and the anointing of Jesus. There's a generation that will walk in faith and establish and will not turn back because of you. Because of you. And there's people around you that you are influencing by your faith, by your love, by your prayers, that heaven sees, whether you do or not, heaven sees. And you are establishing people. You are establishing generations. This is our inheritance. Okay, I'm leaving you with that. And to say, one, there's identity, and the two, the next thing that shows up is presence, and that is a revelation of when God shows up. It's Jesus. It's a Christophany in the Old Testament when Jesus shows up and says, I am the commander. It's like, are you for me or against me? You're my friend or foe. Like, am I on your side? Are you against whatever? And it's like, no, the orientation isn't who he is to you. The orientation is who he is first. It's like, no, I am the commander of the Lord's armies. So orientation is a revelation of him, and then you under him and you with him. That's the orientation of presence. That's the orientation of, in this place, the warrior who was already gone before them and would go with them. And that's what they needed to step into that inheritance. All right. Love you all.